Hello, welcome everyone. This is episode 2 of Business Building with Bejay. This week, we're tackling mental performance. I've got 2 wonderful panelists with me who will introduce themselves in a moment. I'm very excited to tackle how we perform, especially in COVID, and as we come out and ease out of lockdown. I've been a big fan of trying to find my best way to work and be productive. At some point, I was a big fan of hustling and being that person that didn't sleep. And then I became a super big fan of yoga, meditation, and resting. I hope now I'm somewhere in between, but I am on a journey just like everyone else. So without further ado, Andy, would you like to introduce yourself? And then Anne-Laure, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Ayim. Currently run an angel investing school that teaches professionals on how to get started with investing into startups. And then part-time, I also run a productized consulting service that works with highly regulated companies on how to do product management and make it work within their organizations. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation myself because I'm a big fan of a lot of Anne-Laure's work. I subscribe to her newsletter and you should too. And also a big fan of a lot of what Bejay's been putting out more recently, actually, around his journey into entrepreneurship. So I'm a panelist and also a participant this time around.
Amazing. Thanks, Andy. I'm also very excited to learn more. Our conversations together was fun, so I'm glad that I get another opportunity to chat all about that stuff. I'm Anne-Laure Cunff, and I study neuroscience at King's College London. And I also run a company called Nesslabs, where I share content and build a community for people who care about doing more while still taking care of their mental health. And so there's a newsletter which has about 11,000 subscribers now, including Andy and Bejay, and maybe you later, which talks about all of that stuff: mindful productivity, taking care of your mind, doing your best work, being creative, and all of that. And it's all based on neuroscience.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So in the comments or in the chat, you will see Dami's put up a link. So if you guys want to go in and make any notes of what is being shared today, you can. This will be shared publicly in an email wrap up from tomorrow, where you can get the download of everything that's shared. You'll get a link to both Andy and Anne-Laure's newsletters that you can subscribe to. We will be doing a Q&A, so do get your questions in. Dami, who's producing it, will get the questions over to us as panelists, and we'll move into that segment. I'm really excited for this session. I suppose the first place to start is everyone is at home. Everyone is living in times that is very different, and we could have never predicted at the start of the year. I know that when you talk about performance, goal setting is very much aligned with it and spoken in line with, achieving and performing at a high level. I wanted to ask what both of your early experiences of goal setting were and how you approach goal setting in fan season.
Andy, go ahead, you're laughing.
I'm laughing because I think one of the last emails that I sent Anne-Laure months ago was around this post that she posted around setting packed instead of smart goals, but I'm going to leave that to her. I'm not going to talk about that. So I don't set annual goals for myself. I'm more thematic in how I goal set. So I'm a big fan of following my curiosity and tracking the results. Okay, so I have these things around my family and this lifestyle that I want to design that thematically in the next 5 to 10 years that I really want to achieve, but I don't set them as hard goals. And what I do instead is I keep a diary and I keep track of everything I'm experiencing. So it was my daughter's birthday last week. I put that into my diary. I took screenshots and pictures, also put it into my diary. I could have a really impactful conversation here tonight, and I might create an entry into my diary from that. The feedback that I get from this, it might create an entry into my diary. And I use a tool called Notion to create that diary. And what's really powerful is that it allows me to tag items. So I could tag something as feedback, as lessons learned, as inspiration. And then it allows me every 6 months to just analyze actually those tags to understand what themes are coming out when I'm following my curiosity. And that helps me be more intentional around how I spend my time when moving forward. So not a typical answer to kind of these set goals, but that's just what works for me currently.
I love that. And I think we do have quite a few things in common. And I did write an article about this, about For people who are interested in setting goals, like a framework that's very popular is called SMART goals. And it's smart, measurable, repeatable, etc. And it's basically a way of working that is focused on doing, one small thing every day. And the reason why I never really liked it is that it doesn't really work for people who are a bit more ambitious. The R stands for relevance, which means that if you only do SMART goals, you're supposed to only work on stuff that is relevant to you right now. Same doesn't really work if you're someone who has lots of different interests, or maybe today you're working as you're working in a shop or whatever, but tomorrow you want to become a web developer. Like that's something completely different. If you use SMART goals, that wouldn't work for you, because it would mean that you keep on doing what you're currently doing just a little bit better every day, and that you can't change, you can't be ambitious, and you can't dream. So this is why I personally use packed goals instead. And this is for purposeful. So it means that it has to have a lot of meaning to you, so you can sustain your effort through a long time. Actionable, it's something that you can actually do something about. Like, I could have the goal to go on the moon. Awesome, but there's not much I can do about it. So that's probably not going to happen. Actionable, continuous, something that you can do something a little bit every day, every month, and you can keep on improving, and trackable. So that's also why I love how you're taking those notes and you're seeing your progress. You can look back and be like, oh, that's crazy. I was at this stage a year ago, and here I am today. So this is the way I personally work. And this is what has helped me achieve a lot of the different things that I have done, where, if I had kept on only focusing on small, relevant things, I would have probably not decided to go back to school and study neuroscience or teach myself how to code, or all of these fun things that were completely out there at the time for me, but make a lot of sense for me today.
Awesome. Another question I had, I've got a batch of questions today. Next question I had was, right, so there's goal setting, which is just as important, and then there's to-do lists. I think everyone has a different journey with to-do lists. I think on the entrepreneur side, I want to ask Andy how he kind of helps to get first-time entrepreneurs to kind of get their head away from business planning and just making a canvas and working on that side. And Anne-Laure, on your side, I'd love to ask you a question more around your daily performance and how someone can kind of we spoke about end block before, like we have a conversation about time blocking and how you do to-do lists. So yeah, two separate questions for you both. One around how entrepreneurs can better plan and use their energy from a business planning perspective, especially since a lot of people in the audience are currently planning. That's for you, Andy. And then for Anne-Laure, if we can tackle daily productivity and what you're learning at the moment.
Sure. So
both questions if you want. That's not a given.
I think on entrepreneurship, there's a really toxic thing happening in the culture at the moment around everyone aspires to be an entrepreneur. Okay. And everyone shouldn't necessarily be an entrepreneur, even if you have entrepreneurial skills. Okay. And there's no shame, and we shouldn't be demonizing having a career and working for someone. Okay. And the reason it's important to say that is because sometimes there's people in pursuit of this aspiration to be an entrepreneur for the wrong reasons. Okay. Because an entrepreneur at its very basic form is a problem solver. And they just choose to solve a problem a particular way, and it happens through starting an enterprise. And actually, at the beginning of that journey, like when they're a startup, they're not even a company. Okay, they're just a founding team doing research to find out if they've got a problem worth solving with a set of customers. Okay, so we need to like really distinctly take ourselves away from our ideas and this notion of being a successful entrepreneur to just being problem solvers and just get back to basics. And I tell a lot of entrepreneurs not to like write business plans and spend hours or months or even years just creating long documents just full of assumptions and guesses. You might as well just spend 20 minutes to 30 minutes using a template like the lean canvas to just get your idea down on a page. What's the problem? Who's the customer I'm solving it for? What's the unique value proposition? What's the cost and the revenue? Because all I'm doing really is fleshing out my assumptions. And step two is, all right, how do I prioritize now the highest risk assumptions that I need to go and address? Okay, and that's where you start experimenting in the most cost-effective, easiest and quickest ways to validate your assumptions, which is often as simple as just speaking to customers. Okay. And that is the process you should be starting to go through to get into the rhythm of just solving problems in an entrepreneurial way. You know, it might lead to a company, it might not. It might lead to you even joining a company that's solving a problem in a way that you're passionate about, right? So that's the way we need to kind of step away from this whole notion of being an entrepreneur and just focus more on getting to the core of what it means to solve problems, okay? And the second thing I would add is, like, once you starting to experiment, it's good to start using templates like a goal-orientated roadmap. So this is a plan to say, like, for the next 3 months, these are the certain qualitative goals that I want to achieve in this time frame. And these are the metrics or measurements of success that I'm going to use to measure in a quantitative way these goals that I want to achieve. Okay. And it could be as simple as, like, I interview 5 customers to validate whether or not I'm taking a step in the right direction with this idea that I have. So I could go deeper, but Anne-Laure, I'm sure, can supplement that because she gets it as well. We've been through similar processes and think in a similar way. But hopefully that's helpful for getting started with your ideas and really stepping away from this notion of being a rock star entrepreneur.
Anne-Laure?
I love what you said about entrepreneurship, because if I just go back a little bit in terms of how I started Nesslabs, I actually didn't set out to start a company. I was actually trying to get away from entrepreneurship because I had a first startup which failed, and I decided to go back to school just to study how the brain works, because it was a very difficult time for me when my first startup didn't work out. And I started Nesslabs initially as a way for me to share what I was learning, just to write, basically. And by writing, by sharing my journey, I started connecting with like-minded people who basically told me, hey, we love your content, can we have more of this? And then I created a community and I told them, hey, would you be willing to pay to join that community to support my work and my writing? And they said, yeah, sure, we'll give you money so you can keep on writing. And I basically, exactly what Andy was saying about not spending time doing a business plan or whatever, just do something every day and do it, because you think there's a space where there's a problem and where you could contribute something. And that's all right if the way you're going to solve that problem and the way your product is going to look like and the way things are shaping up is something you discover along the way. So I just want to say I completely agree with you, Andy, that we shouldn't spend too much time planning and we should spend more time doing, basically. In terms of productivity on a daily basis and time management, I use something called time blocking, which we discussed with Bejay just before the call started. And for me, it's a way to be mindful of the way I work and the way I spend not only my time, but my mental energy as well. So every Sunday evening, I sit down and I ask myself, what are the 3 things that I absolutely want to accomplish this week? And I write that on a Post-it note and I slap it on the wall in front of my laptop, and I have it in front of my face all the time. And then every morning I review my calendar, I review my meetings, and I review the way I'm going to spend my time. And I make sure that all of this is aligned with the 3 main goals that I have for this week. Anything that is not aligned with it, I move it to another week, basically, or sometimes I get rid of it. But if I have a meeting with someone, even if it's a meeting that I'm sure is going to be really cool, someone interesting, and it's not aligned, I'll just send them a quick note at the very beginning of the week so they have time and say, hey, would absolutely love to chat, but not aligned with what I'm working on this week. Are you okay if we move it to next week? And this way, most of my time is spent doing stuff that actually matters that week. And I finish on Friday usually, and I'm like, yeah, pretty good. I made good progress. And I have a good weekend. I try to really disconnect from work. I just really hang out with friends virtually lately, but to try to hang out with friends. And then on Sunday, I set my new priorities. So this is how I approach my daily productivity.
All right, there we go. I want to supplement what Anne-Laure said actually, because like one of the key traits I've noticed about critical thinkers and strategic thinkers is that they're ruthless at prioritizing. Okay, so like I love when Anne-Laure was sharing like that she's willing to move meetings to the following week, you know, and it's something that I've been doing a lot more this year actually. Like I set up a calendar link, and anyone that just wants like a random meeting with me has one slot once a week at 1:30. And sometimes if they really want a meeting, they have to wait 6 weeks. Wow. Because it's not urgent to me. It's not aligned to what I'm doing. It's more of a favor usually, or it's an interesting catch up, you know. Or if I'm really interested and the person's really keen, they have to meet me at 6:30 a.m. before I start my day, because once I get into my day, there's no space to meet, you know. And it's interesting how sometimes we create these schedules to work for us so that we can be most productive at what we do, and we can use the allotted time that we have to the best of our ability to get what needs to get done, you know. And during COVID, I've had to augment my schedule to start my work, basically wake up at 4:30, 5:30 a.m. And from there, I get deep work done while everyone's sleeping until about 10 a.m. And then 10 a.m. is when I have meetings, and I don't mind because I've actually got through the bulk of what I wanted to get through that day. You know, so to be able to even do this in the evening is only because I was able to get through what I needed to today, and I knew that I would, given that I was waking up so early. So it's really interesting when you speak to critical thinkers about the mental models that they lean on to really like augment their time and be as productive as possible. And I'm sure, I know you can touch on that more.
Absolutely, I love that. I love the way you're doing it too. I thought what I was doing was pretty ruthless, but your version of it with being like, that's your slot, and you know, you have to wait. I really like that actually, and it is important to. It's mostly a matter of, again, being mindful of your own time. I think lots of people are kind of like on that hamster wheel where they almost measure productivity by the number of hours they're working, where we should really ask ourselves, what is the quality of these hours? How much work have I done that is actually contributing towards my success and my progress, both personally and professionally? And I think we both have a slightly different approach to how we achieve this, but basically the goal is that, just making sure that the way we spend our mental energy is aligned with our goals.
That's powerful stuff you guys have both said there. But for someone sat at home who doesn't have the luxury of being independent and might still have, you know, work commitments, waking up before 30, you know, is a powerful tool to get, you know, work done in the morning, especially when you've got a little one, especially when you've got meetings during the day. What's a practical kind of step someone can take to kind of start shifting their week towards that? I kind of want to lean maybe towards what your evening routines are. I guess you're not up at midnight, Andy? Are you on mute again? Unmute yourself.
All right, I'm not going to mute myself again. It's a bad Zoom habit that I've got into about muting myself when I'm not talking. So I think we should take a step back, because for me,
it's quite a big jump to go. If you want to meet me at 6:30, if everyone
you don't start there. You don't start there. You start by having a set of values.
Yeah.
Like you need to for yourselves, like write out what your values are, because your values are your guiding principles that you lean on to make decisions, especially during difficult times. And one of the values for me, for example, was something called 2 and 5. And it meant 2 evenings a week. I was willing to do events like this, usually face-to-face pre-COVID. But 5 evenings a week, I need to be at home with my daughter and my family because I want to be present. So that was 2 and 5. In COVID, I've had to like alter that slightly because I'm at home. But because of these guiding principles I have, it guides the decisions that I'm making. Okay, so the reason that I'm waking up that early is actually guided by the things that I value. So you don't start with just setting up that law, that rule, because you may not even create a habit out of it because you're not dedicated to it. You start with the values, and the values will hopefully help you adhere to those habits that you're forming after that month or after 2 months. It's hard sometimes to adhere to things when you don't really value the value that it creates.
That's a great segue into something that Anne-Laure hosted last month that I attended. So Anne-Laure runs a really awesome community called Nesslabs. I mentioned how big the newsletter is, but during COVID, membership site, and people can actually communicate, those that are interested in brain hacking, interested in their mental performance, interested in finding out better ways to perform and be better as humans. Sorry if I've misquoted it, but that's how I understand it. And one of the first activations she did with this membership community she's built is she hosted a webinar all around habits, routines, and rituals. And going in line with what Andy just mentioned on guiding principles, do you want to maybe talk a little bit on the differences between the three? 'Cause I think sometimes people can kind of get the three confused.
Absolutely. So the reason why I did this webinar was because, as you mentioned at the beginning of this chat, these are weird times, right? So we're all struggling. It's mentally taxing having to stay at home, and you know, I hear lots of people actually telling me that they find themselves working more than they used to because it's really hard to you lose track of time. You're like, oh no, shit, it's midnight. I'm still on my laptop doing work, and you know, also, so it's actually funny because you would think lots of people who are against remote work would we're saying, oh, if I'm not here to look at people like over the shoulders and making sure they're working, they're going to be lazy and not work. Actually, that's not what's happening. People are working too much. So this is why we had this conversation to kind of like learn how to reclaim your habits, your routines, and your rituals in your daily life, even if you're stuck at home and you feel like you're a bit powerless. In terms of difference between the three, the main difference is the level of intentionality that you have between the three. So habits are automatic, completely automatic. You don't think about it, you just do it. And they can be good or they can be bad. So, you know, bad habit, smoking, drinking, you know, you say you have a drinking habit, you have a smoking habit. Good habit, I hope everyone here has it, like, you know, brushing your teeth. Like, that's a good one. It's good. You don't think about it. You wake up in the morning, you start brushing your teeth. That's good. Don't lose that habit. So some habits can be good, some can be bad. But the point is, you don't think about it. You just do it like almost like a robot. So yeah, very little level of control, etc. Routines are things that you have a higher level of consciousness. You tell yourself to do it. You have to force yourself to do it a little bit. An example is making your bed for lots of people. Making your bed is something where you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to do my bed. First thing I do in the morning, but I don't think people have a making your bed a habit, like very few people. Maybe people in the military after a while, but most people, it's that thing, you know you should do it, so you force yourself to do it. For lots of people, running, for example, exercise, that's a routine because you still have to be like, okay, I'm going to put my shoes on, I'm going to do it, I know it's good for me, but often never becomes a habit. But you never say, for example, he has a drinking routine or a smoking routine. So yeah, it's like more consciousness. And then rituals are the highest level of consciousness. This is when you bring your whole self to the task. And for lots of people, that includes meditation, journaling, but anything really can become a ritual. I have a friend, for example, she has a skincare ritual. For her, she puts some candles, music, she closed the door of the bathroom, she stays there for an hour, she almost meditates as in she's taking care of her skin, and her skincare routine is not a skincare routine, it's a skincare ritual for her. And anything that is a routine, running can become a ritual for some people. Like you just bring more intentionality to it. You know, Andy, like I'm not sure exactly about you, but you know, you write a lot, you reflect a lot on your journals and these things. You know, you probably sometimes have higher levels of intentionality, and like it can become a ritual to have this reflection. Yeah. So that's what habits, routines, and rituals are. And I don't think any are good or bad. Even rituals can be bad. Like some people, they're like, I can't write if I'm not on that special desk with my special pen. I'm like, that's the ritual is blocking you now. You can write with any type of pen. Like you don't need the special pen to write. So they're completely neutral. What's important is to be aware of them and to reclaim them and to always ask yourself, am I doing this because it's a habit, or do I want this to become a routine, or could I turn this into a ritual? And thinking about that, I think, is already can help a lot in terms of feeling better mentally, especially in these work times.
I love that. That's where tracking and having a diary is really powerful. Like tracking what your routines are, like what your rituals are. I love that. So good.
Have either of you ever heard of the bullet journal and the Bujo movement? Have you?
Yeah. I don't use it myself, but I've heard about it, and I think I'm fascinated by all of the different journaling techniques that people have. But that's something I try not to be prescriptive about, because I think what's more important is to build that time for reflection. And if for you, the bullet journal works, amazing. For some people, it's too much work, because it's like quite like, yeah, you have this, and like you have all of the doodling. I'm like, oh my God. My journaling is, I call it plus minus next. It's 3 columns. What went well that week? What didn't go well? What I want to do to make things better next week? And I do that on Sunday, and that's it. And I'm not saying it's the best. I'm saying that's what I can stick to. And I think whatever works for you, so you can make it a consistent habit, is fine, basically. I don't know if, Andy, maybe you have a special way of approaching it.
No, I follow the feeling. Like if something triggers me, a thought, you know, I just go into my journal and I capture the words. But the reason I really love using Notion for it is because it allows me to screenshot. And screenshot has been a phenomenal life changer for me, because I screenshot a message on LinkedIn, on Instagram, a picture. And what it allows me to do is capture the essence of what was said in its true format and in its true words, you know. And so when I look back, I'm looking at the original context and the content that was said. And that's been really powerful and reflective for me. And it was interesting hearing you talk, actually, Anne-Laure, because it made me really think about a lot of the ceremonies and routines that I have with my teams that I work with, because we have a retrospective every 2 weeks where we're writing down actually what are the things that didn't go well as a team, what went well, and what are the things that we could do differently moving forward. And then we distribute the actions so that someone owns it and makes sure that in the next 2 weeks, we don't repeat those same things. And then we have like our stand-ups every day, where we talk about what we're working on today, what we worked on yesterday, and any challenges that we faced. And again, that's a ceremony that's uninterrupted. It's like there's no questions. We just get through it really quick and efficiently. And it's all these routines that are actually to help us become more productive, remove any challenges, and help us communicate on a consistent basis so that we don't let the ball slip. So it's interesting when thinking about it on an individual level and then on a team level, if you're working with other colleagues as well.
Wow. Absolutely. Yeah. What's amazing too is that lots of the stuff that you can do for yourself sometimes can be better to do with other people. And I know that sometimes, for example, when I journal, which, you know, self-reflection is not enough. I actually need a sounding board, and it can be helpful sometimes after, you know, I'm like, okay, I finished like kind of like writing a journal entry, and I'm like, I still don't know. I'm still a bit lost. But it helps me also think about who would be the right person to talk to. And I can then, like, you know, send a message to a friend and be like, hey, do you have a little bit of time? Can we talk? And it's a much more productive conversation because I took the time before to kind of process what I was going through and what were my options, etc. So I think, yeah, lots of people see reflection as something you don't do on your own, but I agree with you, Andy, that sometimes doing it, you know, with other people, could be just a friend, could be with your team, can be super productive too.
Especially when you can connect the dots as well across the board, because I remember I asked last year, I asked a few friends, a few ex-colleagues, a few like founders, and I think like 1 or 2 associates that I knew. And I asked them, what do you think comes easy to me but difficult to others? And it was really interesting what I had reflected on and thought about myself versus the themes that came out from what they thought about me. And it changed my perception of my perceived value to others.
I think you call what you just did there your personal board, and you've mentioned it in your workbook, Andy. Can you take us into a bit of a segment about people designing their first personal board from the start, their first personal board of advisors?
Oh, personal board of advisors. Okay, so that's similar topic. So especially with entrepreneurship, right? But this is transferable even in careers and into other fields of life. But I believe there's 2 elements of community that's really important. One is to have a peer-to-peer community of other like-minded individuals that are going through this experience with you. So imagine being on a graduate scheme when you've just joined a new company, or you've joined a co-working community or an accelerator program as an entrepreneur. There's solace in knowing that you're not crazy alone. And actually there's other people that you can confide with and share with because they're going through these experiences too. And then the second level of community that's really important is having a personal board of advisors, right? And similar to a company board of advisors, these are people that you don't officially tell them that this is what you call them, but really you go to them as a sounding board. and you respect them because of certain experience that they've had that's relevant to what you're going through, or actually you just respect them as a trusted advisor to help you come to a more informed decision when you're making decisions. Yeah. So if you imagine, when I was a management consultant, for example, I really wanted to get into entrepreneurship, but wasn't really sure what role. So I thought it was product management. But through bouncing off my personal board of advisors, I learned a lot of the positives and the negatives associated with that career switch. And it helped me become to a more informed decision because I had other data to go on rather than my own. And it challenged a lot of the biases that I had that I wasn't even aware of until I started having those conversations. So a personal board of advisors is a very, very useful set of people to have to help you make smart decisions on a more consistent basis.
Of that. So we've covered habits and routines. We've covered the science behind mental productivity. I want to touch a little bit on brain hacks around action. We've obviously done a bit of brain hack conversation before we open to Q&A. So productivity, procrastination, they can very easily slip and slide depending on who the person is. And there is even a question around what is procrastination, because some form of procrastination can sometimes lead to innovation. When you think about the world you can end up, I know Anne's laughing because Rome research can show you that everything's connected sometimes. But the question I have is what things can the audience take away that can enable them to kind of have a bit more of a doing mentality? I know, Andy, you've written a bit about people actually switching off, not having to work late. I want to just deep dive a bit about how you both get your mind in the game to kind of do work, especially if you're coming off a draining back-to-back afternoon of calls, or you're shifting from one project to another project. I wonder if there's anything that's your maybe countdown from 5, maybe doesn't have to be a ritual, but it could be a framework that you work off that you found works for you in terms of getting your brain in gear to take action or to do an activity. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. I have two things. First, I have a super simple technique that I use every time I don't really feel like it. I call it the 10-minute rule. And it's just basically telling, I'm sitting down and I'm working on the thing for 10 minutes. Very often I'll end up working on it much longer and even finish the task. But somehow it tricks my brain to say just 10 minutes. And if, after 10 minutes, I don't want to work on it anymore, that's fine. So that's the first thing. And honestly, I really recommend it to anyone. You can be like, it's fine. I had blocked an hour for this. I just can't do it. You know what? I can do 10 minutes. If after 10 minutes, I don't want to do it, the other 50 minutes in that hour, I can do nothing. That's okay. Never happens. You end up, once you start, it's starting that is the harder very often. Once you got started, very often you can do it. That being said, sometimes I really don't feel like it. I really don't want to do something. And it's very important, I think. Lots of productivity frameworks are about doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff. Sometimes it's important also to take a step back and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why do I want to do it? Am I the right person to do it? Do I need help? What is the thing that's blocking me? And a useful framework that I use to do this in a more structured way is the heart, head, hand framework. So it's just asking yourself, is the problem with my head, my heart, or my hand? If it's with my head, it means, is it because I don't understand the problem? Is the problem too complicated? Am I lacking information? Is this why I'm not comfortable doing this? In that case, instead of working on the task, I'm going to work on getting more knowledge so I feel comfortable doing the task. Is it a hard thing? Am I just not interested by this thing? Is this in that case, do I really need to do it? Your taxes, sorry, you're never going to feel passionate about this, but I'm just going to force myself. Or is it something I can actually drop because it doesn't make sense, or maybe I don't have the mental energy right now? And sometimes it's a hand thing. I actually, I understand what needs to be done. I want to do it, but I'm lacking the skills. Maybe I want to code something and this is a little bit too hard for me. Maybe, I'm lacking some practical skills. In that case, I can either ask help from someone who's more experienced than I am and they can help me do it. Or maybe I can take an online course or just upskill myself and make sure that I can actually work on something. So 10-minute rule. And if really I can't do it, I dig a little bit deeper and try to understand what are the root causes of my lack of motivation and of my procrastination.
I love that. I love that. And it's so funny because at home, we've got a 10-minute rule, but we apply it to movies. So when my daughter wants to watch a new movie on Netflix, we commit to 10 minutes. If it's not good, we're not watching it.
I love that.
So I think, like, in terms of switching off, actually, because it's really important for me to be present at home because my daughter's free, my partner's here, and when I'm at home, I wanna be fully present mentally as well as physically, and not really be here physically, but thinking about work or wanting to do work on my mind. And that was difficult for me, I would say 12 months ago. But what I've learned now is as soon as I get in the door, I make sure my laptop is off and my smartphone goes into a separate room completely. Okay, and I physically had to do that first to just be present, you know. And what I learned through doing that is that it's never as urgent as you think it is. Work's a bit funny, like it's never as urgent as you think it is. And I remember going through this exercise of doing something called a pre-mortem, which is where you act like the worst case scenario is going to play out, you know. And I used to do that for certain projects or certain tasks. Like if I don't do it, all the things that could go wrong. And then through doing that, it actually made me aware of a list of risks and dependencies that I could then manage more appropriately going forward, you know. And I always used to remind myself, and this is really extreme, but if I was on my deathbed, am I going to ask for my colleagues at work, or am I going to ask for my family, and why? And it reminds me about the importance of being present at home because it means so much to me, you know. So for me, the difficulty was like switching off at first, and then it became almost the opposite. Like, no, like actually my family's like my sun of my universe, and everything's revolving around this, rather than work being the sun of my universe and I'm revolving around work. And I think when you're an entrepreneur, because it's so all-consuming, sometimes actually it's difficult to erect the right boundaries, to understand the boundaries of the playground that you're operating in. So it's really important to really erect boundaries and understand actually, like, when I'm at home, when I'm at work, when I'm at family, when I'm with colleagues, and the difference between the two.
This resonates so much with me. I published an article, I think last week, that went kind of semi-viral, got tens of thousands of people who shared it, that was called, "Are we too busy to enjoy life?" And one of the sentences that I had people send me back and saying, that really hit me. Like I wrote, no one, looks back at the end of the year or on their deathbed and say, oh my God, look at all of the tasks that I managed to check on my to-do list. Absolutely no one. So what you just said about, kind of like recalibrating the like meaning in your life, like what's really important. I think this is, I feel it too. And it's very important to remind ourselves of this when sometimes we're so busy that we don't realize that we're missing some of the stuff that is actually important. So all of these productivity techniques and strategies, they should only be tools so you can make sure that you have time for the things and the people that really matter to you, and not the other way around. I agree with you.
It's funny, actually. I'll tell this quick story, but I heard this story about this old musician who lived on an island village, and a guy came up to her and said, "Your music's amazing. How come you only play once a week in this small little village?" And she said, and he asked her, like, "What else do you do with your time?" And she said, "I spend time with my family. I visit my friends in the town. I kick back and have jokes, and I eat good food." And the guy was an MBA student. So he said, if you sold your music online on streaming platforms, you can make so much more money. You could even hire a manager to help you grow and do more performances throughout the week. And actually, if you succeed in doing that, the next thing you could do is actually go touring around the world. And she asked, and then next, what's next? He's like, you can actually live anywhere you want once you start succeeding globally as a music artist. She says, and then what? And then you can make as much money as you want, and you can invest it in property, in stocks and shares, and start generating wealth. And then what? And then he said, and then finally, like, of course, you can just kick back, relax, spend time with family, chill, eat good food. And the moral of the story is, like, why waste 25 years doing that, right? When sometimes less is more, but sometimes more is less. So we should be conscious about what are the things that actually bring us joy and happiness now, and how can we be more present in the moment now, rather than always just dreaming about the future and chasing something to attain something that we could have maybe even today.
This is so powerful.
That was a great story. That's worth a couple of horns.
Oh, on the radio.
No, and it's almost even interesting with that is like COVID and everyone being at home is bringing people more close to that reality. I suppose no matter what you're going through, you know, if you've got a roof over your head, you've got a warm meal, there's a lot to be grateful for. And it's in these time periods that those kind of mental shifts can happen for a lot of people. So that story really resonated. I suppose this is a great time to segue into our Q&A. We've got a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm going to spit fire to you guys and you guys can answer it. Don't feel like you both need to answer it. If one of you answer it, that's fine. First question is from Faye, and she says, or they say, how do you manage expectations when you are delivering a project or work for someone else? How do you manage expectations when you're delivering?
I can go quickly on this one because I also do freelancing and consulting. And I mean, something that you've probably heard before, but, you know, always, what did they say in English? Under promise, over deliver, basically. Like that's a pretty common one. You've probably heard it before, but it is true.
I want to hear it in French now.
Yeah, say in French.
But I don't think we have it in French. So, yeah. In French, we just don't promise anything, so we don't even have to worry about it. But yeah, if you're freelancing in English, you can just make sure to, you know, it's a mistake I've done early in my career as a consultant, where you get really excited, you really want to get the contract, and so you promise the moon. And, you know, I always delivered what I said I would, but I put myself through so much unnecessary stress and nights where I was not sleeping enough because I had given, you know, a due date that I would deliver the work that was completely unrealistic because I wanted to give the impression that I was a rock star freelancer that they really had to work with. Whereas now I'm focusing more on the quality of the work that I'm giving, and I'm, you know, completely comfortable. I also try to pick people I work with that are not the kind of people who needed the project ready for yesterday and were rushing you, etc. So I would say, you know, first, if you work with, you know, good clients basically, or you have a good manager, or, you know, someone that is sensible to work with, then it's really more about you being very clear, communicating the time it's going to take, the effort, energy, money sometimes that it's going to take to get something to be done. And to always have a little bit of buffer between what you think you're going to be able to achieve and deliver and what you're, you know, telling them. So this way, if anything goes wrong, and in life and business, there's always something that goes wrong, you can still have this without stressing yourself like crazy.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I would add to that is around like the relationship of time and value. You know, like one of the things that I've learned now in consulting with large corporates especially is that the quality of the inputs leads to the quality of the outputs sometimes. So you need to set a good brief up front to understand what problem am I solving? Who am I solving it for? What does success look like to you? How can we measure that? And are we agreed and aligned on the measurement of success so that I can manage expectations? Is there any politics that I should be aware of? Right? Because there's always relationship issues that sometimes you can't see on the surface that could affect you delivering that piece of work. Are there any constraints that I should be aware of? You know, all of these kind of questions are the quality kind of questions that you want for your brief up front to get the quality inputs to help you manage expectations, deliver that quality within a reasonable time frame.
Awesome. Question number 2. I used Make Time, How to Focus on What Matters Every Day by Jake Knapp and Jay-Z. A guy called John Zerk. I've read the book as well. Of course, and settling the highlight for each day is great, but when I didn't achieve my highlight, I felt bad. Any tips on failure and managing it positively?
Yeah, I see that Faye has asked a very similar question afterwards. So maybe we can look at these two together. Faye is asking, how do you ensure you don't feel disappointed when you haven't completed all the tasks you set for yourself on a day? And I think these are similar questions, and they're very good questions because there's the goal setting part that lots of people talk about. But then, yes, again, life happens. And sometimes at the end of the day, like you didn't manage to do everything that you wanted to do. And I think the most important thing is to really, again, make sure that you have time for reflection, so you can understand what went wrong and you can improve things later. An expression that I love, it's one of my favorite expressions, is fail like a scientist. The reason why I love this expression is because scientists, when they do an experiment, they don't design the experiment to succeed because they don't know if it's going to succeed. And if you think about science and all of the discoveries that we have made as a human species, it's basically all built on the mountain of trial, error, and big failures. And at some point it succeeds. So really what's important is that iterative process, and to not beat yourself up, because what you did, which is much more than some people who do nothing, what you did is that you tried. You did try, it didn't work out. Why didn't it work out? Let's try, reflect, and understand, and then let's try again tomorrow. And if it didn't work out tomorrow again, that's fine. You probably learned something new and you can keep on doing this. And as long as you don't bury your head in the sand and you actually face the challenges that you have and you try to really understand them and you try to tweak things little by little, it's not a failure, it's learning.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that, and I agree with that completely. And I think it's really important to just emphasize the point that, like, as an entrepreneur, it's both a scientific process and an artistic, chaotic process, right? And I love what Anne was sharing, because it's about being hypothesis driven. I have this hypothesis that I'm not attached to, that I'm trying to prove or disprove. And actually, I'm not incentivized regardless of the result. Both are good results because both lead to learning. Like, if it goes in my favor because I've got this confirmation bias, it's good because I'm taking a step in the right direction. If it disproves my hypothesis, it's also good because it can save me time, money, and resources going down the wrong direction. So actually both are literally a good result for you. It's just your perception on how you see it and managing that confirmation bias that you have sometimes to want to see your idea become a thing.
Well, next question. Business sometimes involves sacrifice, as we've spoken about. How do you balance work and make people understand that you may miss their birthday celebration as your I think it's community.
That's funny.
I can answer this. This is like
this sounds personal. This sounds like this has happened. Speaking to somebody.
Yeah, I think in 10 years of doing business, I think you can never. I think what we've spoke about here around your guiding principles and knowing why you're doing what you're doing. And if you've got that understood, if you have to do an activity, those that love you will understand if you communicate. You can never really pass anything in life by not communicating and just going AWOL. I think that's when you end up in that situation. But obviously, if the person you're talking about the birthday celebration is your mother and you're talking about IP Owners Company, I can understand, that's a real life thing. I don't know if either of you have any other comments on that, but I think communication is something that is very, very important, and overlaying that with your guiding principle can help you out of that situation.
I think it's so contextual, but it's difficult to give a blanket answer that I'm going to apply to all of the situations. But one thing that I was told at the beginning of my career about 11 years ago that has stuck with me since is that regardless what career you go into or what business that you start, we're all in the business of nurturing long-term relationships. We're born in this earth to connect with people, and we were not born for a lonely existence. So we need to remember that when we're making some of these decisions as well. Not to say that you're always going to choose a person's birthday, but it's like Bejay said, it's like, okay, what can I do to nurture that relationship and maintain it because I value it? And it might be just proactively telling the person, I can't make it for these reasons, but I'd love to set aside some time on this day for us to have lunch on me. So it doesn't cost you anything to be proactive in managing a relationship that you really truly respect and value.
Awesome.
Sorry.
You're just like...
It's such a precise question. I have all of these word scenarios in my head, imagining what happened to the person who asked it.
All right, next question. Do you give yourself the entrepreneur title, or is it assigned by someone else?
Oh, cool. I want to say just call yourself whatever you want. I use the entrepreneur title mostly for press interviews or stuff like this, where they need to have something that goes with your name, not, hey, it's Anne-Laure. That's it. Like people want some context. So I use it for that. I don't think I use it that much when I introduce myself to people. I just tend to describe what I work on in general. Like, you know, saying that I founded a company doing this or that, or a bit like Andy also introduced himself saying, you know, in terms of problem I'm trying to solve rather than saying I'm an entrepreneur. That being said, it's not a protected denomination like being a doctor. So if you want to call yourself an entrepreneur, I think that's completely fine.
Yeah, just don't get caught up in the whole hype.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, that's why I'm like, you know, obviously do it if you want to do it. I just genuinely don't think that that's the most important thing, and that, yeah, people will start calling you entrepreneur probably after a while once you've demonstrated that you can build a business. And it does feel a little bit awkward sometimes when you see people who basically just bought a domain and they put up a free landing page and apparently they're a startup founder. And people don't say it, no one talks about it out loud, but I think people think it may be a little bit awkward. So I would just say, do the work and don't worry too much about the job titles.
Yeah, and I think even from a mental wellness perspective, like, you can alleviate pressure off yourself if you don't give yourself that title at the start. Like, if you just focus on
CEO and MD, like if you're a one-man band,
just focus on solving the problem for the tribe that you've identified. And like what Anne-Laure shared with her story, if you continue to find more members of that tribe and you continue to add value and solve that problem, great. Like, just continue doing that, and eventually people will start labeling you as an entrepreneur naturally anyway. But whether you label yourself as an entrepreneur or doesn't remove your value or the value that you create. So I wouldn't get caught up in that too much at all.
Oh, love that. What advice would you give to university students graduating this summer and next summer regarding the COVID-19 situation?
Oh, I have thoughts on this actually. I've seen there was a thread on Twitter that went a little bit viral, and not in a good way, because someone posted saying, if you come out of the other side of this crisis and you've not contributed something big to try and make things better, then don't even apply to my company. I would never hire you. And to me, that was such a bad take, because the very first thing I want to tell any student that is, you know, like currently going through this, which is everyone, is please just take care of yourself first. Stay home and take care of yourself. That's the number one thing you can do right now. You don't need to be a superhero who has built 3 different businesses during this time and who has learned coding and designing and illustration and who has been like the most productive person on earth to, you know, to be a good human being, basically. So be careful of the productivity porn telling you that you should be doing all of these things because you're stuck at home. Your mental health is the most important thing. That being said, if you're feeling, you know, if your mental health is good, if you're not going completely crazy, if you do have a bit of time, if you don't have 3 kids you need to take care of at home or someone you need to, you know, take care of, basically, if you have the mental bandwidth and if you have the time and there's something you've been curious about, and that you've been wanting to learn and that maybe you didn't have the time to do, yes, definitely do use that time to explore different skills that you're curious about, things that you can learn online, etc. It will be, you know, a good time maybe to diversify your CV with more skills that make your profile a little bit more different. So, but keep it fun and keep it stuff that you're actually interested in, and don't become too practical about this. Use this time to explore your curiosity.
I love that. Yeah, I support that 100%. Experiment with things, like, to feed your curiosity. And I think it's really important what Anne-Laure touched on around like privilege and oppression there as well, because when I graduated from university, I was very interested in entrepreneurship, but I couldn't afford to take a job at a startup because I had to contribute back home. So I literally couldn't take that wage in order to make a meaningful contribution to my family. So some people don't realize that, like, there's a spectrum across privilege and oppression. And a lot of us have a certain level of privilege, even being on the internet and being on this call, right? And sometimes we should take stock of that, you know. And I think one of the biggest things that I would encourage people leaving university is to develop this habit as a lifelong learner. So how do you become more self-directed in feeding your curiosity, tracking the results, and really being intentional about what you're learning, you know, because it takes time to experiment and try things out. And a part of that journey is like for the first 5 or 10 years, maybe out of uni, just alleviating the pressure of being like, I need to be an investment banker, I need to work in tech, and just be curious and feed it and see where it leads you to. You know, I think the pressure kind of comes more when you're like 30 to 40. Then it's like, all right, I need to get in check now.
Love that. Do you have any tips for maintaining concentration when working? This could be a short fire question.
I love the phone. We talked about it before we went live. Andy does it for personal reasons, to be fully present with his family. I don't know if you do it for work also, but in my case, I do that for work as well. If I want to do some deep work, it's phone in the bedroom while I work in the living room, and it's actually really fun.
Do you turn off WhatsApp web and Telegram web and all of that as well?
Yes, for deep work, yes, I do that because I know myself. I know I'm addicted to these things. I know that I don't have the willpower to not check it if it's open. And actually, there's lots of research showing that willpower is not something you should use to do your work. You should instead create an environment where you never have to use the willpower because we have very little of it. Yeah, so
it's like turning notifications off.
Exactly, because if you see the notification, you will click it, right? So you will check it. So no notifications, phone somewhere else. And honestly, to me, that's super simple, but that's one of the most powerful things that I've done to stay focused when I'm trying to work.
I love that. And I think on Mac, it's really good when you can set up different desktops. So it's like when I'm in this desktop, there is no distractions. Like you said, you're doing your deep work and you're not switching to other desktops. But the notifications one was a big game changer for me. As soon as I turned off email notifications or WhatsApp and social media notifications, it made a big difference.
So do you turn your WhatsApp notifications on like throughout the day?
No, my WhatsApp notifications are off period, to be honest. They're never on. But I a lot of time, like maybe just after breakfast or at lunchtime or after work at some point, I'll rummage through all the messages. And what I've noticed is that I'm the poorest contributor to groups because I'm always missing all the messages. I'm always missing the messages in groups or replying out of context like LOL 5 hours later. So I'm really bad in groups, but
no, the feedback, because we're in a couple of groups together, the feedback from people is when you do talk, you have something valid to say. So I suppose it's just about rebalancing your role you're going to play in the group chats if you're not going to be on it all the time. But you're not that bad. There's people that are worse. Right, next question. More generally, what advice, to be honest, let's just stick on that. I'm in Anne-Laure's newsletter group. I'm always watching. I don't really comment. So I'm a really bad example of just like watching. Anyways, more generally, what advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
I'll take the advice that Anne-Laure shared to the university student. I needed that advice when I was 21.
Yeah, I would say it's not too late to myself. There's lots of stuff I didn't do around 21, 22, 23, 24, because I think at the time there were so many successful entrepreneurs, Mark Zuckerberg, etc., that were really young and they had made it already. And I know it sounds stupid now that I think about it, but at the time I really thought it was too late, that I missed the boat. And there's so many things I didn't do. I only started learning how to code last year when I was 29. Because I didn't do it before because I said, it's too late. It's like, I'm never going to be a good coder. There's no point. It's too late to write a book. It's too late for so many things. And I only started around 28, 29 to kind of like look and be like, well, if I'm lucky, I'm probably still have good 50 years, 60 years or something. It's a lot of time. I do have time and there's so much I can do. So I wish my 21-year-old knew that and was not so insecure. So that's what I would tell myself. Just start today. Whatever you want to start, just do it.
I love that. I think the other thing that I would have told myself as well is to travel more and go and open your mind and become an active participant wherever you travel to. Get involved with the culture, with the food, learn. Because I think when I started traveling, it really opened my mind and I realized there's life outside of Tottenham. And I had to separate myself from relativity. I've got it hard. It's a hard life. It's not really actually compared to a lot of other people's lifestyles when I was visiting Soweto in South Africa or favelas in Brazil. So relativity is really powerful. And that comes, I think, from traveling and just being an active participant when you travel. And the second thing around when I was younger is I wish I told myself to be my most authentic self, and that would lead to me doing my best work. Because I remember in my first job at EY, I was 60% my true self because I didn't feel at home. And I didn't feel like I could make a contribution because culturally it was just like two worlds clashing, right? I was in Tottenham, I was speaking slang and all sorts of language, and I just felt like I couldn't articulate myself amongst the peers that I was working with, and they didn't actually make me feel as welcome to do so either. So looking back, I wish I was my most authentic self from the beginning, because it takes a lot of effort and energy to be fake and to be someone that you're not, just to try and fit in.
Love that.
Love that. How do you bounce back from setbacks and past traumas? What advice would you give on this?
Oh.
I'm still dealing with that now.
Yeah, it's I think, yeah, like shortly, because again, like it's hard, it's contextual, and like it really depends also on what kind of resources and support you have around you. But really the main thing to me is to be kind to yourself, and like to really take your time, and to, you know, not beat yourself up even more if it's taking time to heal. It does take time. The bigger the trauma, the longer it's going to take to heal. And to some extent, you may have to deal with some of your trauma for years, and kind of like accepting that and looking at it as something that is part of you and that you can look at and manage and learn from, rather than something that you absolutely want to get rid of as quickly as possible, is probably a bit, you know, a healthier way basically to go about it. And I know it's easier said than done, and dealing with trauma is really hard, so there's no magic recipe, but being kind to yourself and taking your time. And it's okay if you don't manage to just like snap out of it and feel better straight away. It takes time.
And did you have anything you want to say about dealing with bounce back?
I honestly don't.
So I wrote a little bit about traumas and setbacks in my article I released yesterday. And I think obviously now is quite a traumatic time for a lot of different people, from a personal level and also a business level. I think just bringing back a lot of stuff that's already been said in this conversation, realigning yourself with your guiding principle and your purpose, and trying to go deeper around that can really be a great way to enable you to have the data you want to make the decision around what you do next. Healing is going to take however long it's going to take, as Anne-Laure mentioned. But rushing to try and get yourself out of it is not going to be the one. And putting yourself back in a place where you're just connecting with yourself and being a bit more selfless regarding what you want and what you need is something that I think we can all universally agree on.
On that topic, actually, there's a guy called I think his name is David Brooks, and he was a New York Times columnist, and he's wrote a book called Second Mountain People, where he's called Second Mountain, and he talks about basically like when we're young, sometimes in our career, we're very selfish around our ambition. Like we want to get paid more, we want to get promoted, we want to develop these skills, and then sometimes you go through this moment of like adversity where you may have to descend from that mountain when things don't go your way, or you may lose a job, you know, or may not get the promotion you thought, or you may try and become an entrepreneur. And then you have to ascend a new mountain, but you ascend it with a different mind frame where you're more mission focused, you're more selfless, you're more thinking about servitude to others. You're more thinking about actually what can I do to contribute to others, and in doing so, that would be great for me. And it's really interesting actually, like the approach that Second Mountain people take to kind of going through this experience of dealing with things like trauma. And a lot of times during that moment of adversity, a lot of them take time in the wilderness. They take time in solitude, alone. You know, it could be like backpacking for 3 months. You know, it could be like being jobless and at home and just being in deep thoughts and going on walks. You know, it could be COVID for some people, right? So it's really interesting when you spend time alone with intention to just reflect, like Anne-Laure's been talking about throughout this whole conversation, and have conversations with yourself and really write things down and get out of your head and bounce it off others that you trust.
Like that. So people talk a lot about multiple income streams as a young person, but what about if you don't want to start your own business and just want to live in the moment for now?
Yeah, then don't do it.
Choice, yeah. You should dictate that for you. Easy.
Yeah, it's quite. But keep being curious. Keep coming to webinars like this. Join newsletters like what they both have, and just to keep expanding your mind. I think Andy kind of knocked out the park early on in this webinar with not everyone needs to be this rockstar entrepreneur. Because life is so big. I think there's a quote I've always listened back to many years, and it's the first 100 employees of Facebook are all millionaires. You know, you don't be this kind of person that works these crazy hours if it's not for you and if it's not something you want to do. So finding yourself is something that I'm going to look to and tackle in this series.
I think basically as well, by the way, if you separate yourself from monetary reward and say to yourself, you know, Victoria Beckham's hairstylist gets paid hundreds of thousands, so you can be a hairstylist and do very well. Like if you separate yourself from monetary reward, I think you can think more fluidly around like doing purposeful work and really working at the intersection of the things that you're passionate about and the things that you're actually skilled at, you know, because I think sometimes the pressure comes from the monetary reward or the thought of wealth or money that as a reward of doing such work. And I think that's what's leading a lot of people astray actually in the decisions that they're making around their career or starting a business.
Love that. What do you do if you keep making the same mistakes? Question mark. Signed, anonymous attendee.
I'm going to repeat myself, but reflection again. I think if you keep on making the same mistakes and you realize you're doing that, like it's this Einstein quote that says madness is keeping on doing the same thing, like, you know, even something like that, even though it doesn't work, you keep on repeating the exact same thing. So it is problematic if you realize you're making the same mistake and you still keep on doing it. So the problem is maybe that you haven't realized why you're making the mistake maybe, or I don't know exactly what's missing here, but you probably need to think about it more, because normally if you spend enough time thinking about the way you're behaving and the decisions that you're making, and you keep on reflecting on it and keeping on improving a little bit every day, keeping on doing the exact same mistake again and again and all over again, I'm not sure. There's something missing in your kind of like reflection cycle, I think. Agreed.
Cool. The next question, this comes from Seb. Can you talk about your approach to intensity in regards to working? Do you go 100% all the time, 50% at some weeks? What factors determine your intensity of work, and how do you stop burnout in regards to the above? So that's free.
Go. Yeah. I was gonna say it's very difficult to quantify whether you're going 50% or 100% at anything. So I think if we separate ourselves from the percentages, how I avoid burnout is being really intentional with our time. I think we've both shared a lot on that during this webinar, and how, you know, like we separate time to do deep work. Like for Anne-Laure, it's the 10-minute rule, then going in for an hour typically. You know, for me, it's at 4:30 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. and going intentionally deep on work to a point of satisfaction for me. I'm never really like getting into a position where I burn out, because my calendar is like my operating system. And in my calendar from 10 till 1 p.m. is family time, regardless what invite I had at 11, regardless if I didn't finish where I wanted to at 10. And guess what happens when I resume the work? It's okay. Or if I miss that meeting, there's minutes. And you realize actually, like when you start really being more intentional around and taking control about your life, and your calendar is a good indication of this. Like if you look at your calendar, you think, how many things were put in my calendar I didn't want, but I've just been put in my calendar, versus the things that I'm in control of in my calendar. And I think that's a better indication, because sometimes at work, like you're not actually getting paid overtime. You're not actually getting paid less. Like there's no what do you call it? There's no relationship with how much you're getting paid and whether you burned out or not. So you need to maintain your health, because if you're not healthy, you can't operate in this world, let alone work. You know, so that's more on you even sometimes than thinking about your employer. And if it's not the right employer for you, that's okay. You just need to walk away. You know, we have the privilege of being in London, and London is one of the most amazing cities in the world when it comes to opportunities, actually. And you realize that a lot, actually, when you travel to other cities in the world. So I went off script there and I digressed a little bit, but yeah.
I totally agree with you, Andy. And I did go through burnout myself, and that was when I was still working at Google. And it was definitely that lack of control over what work I was doing and when I was doing it. And because, I was saying yes to everything, I had meetings being added into my calendar without asking me first, but I was very new to the company. So I was just saying yes and yes and yes. And I was just lacking sleep. I traveled to San Francisco and I still kept on attending my meetings that were London time, basically. So I was also sleeping 2-3 hours a night. It was absolutely ridiculous. But the essence of why it happened was exactly that lack of priority, lack of control over my calendar, lack of mindfulness in terms of what actually made sense to work on. And I do realize that when you're very early in your career, you may feel less comfortable actually speaking up and saying, hey, this is not making sense. This is too much work. This is not aligned with our priorities. And it does require courage to have that conversation with a manager, for example. But really, for me, I had a bit of a hard time, just gathering the courage to do it. But once I did it at the time, once I had that conversation with my manager and we looked at everything and we moved or gave to other people everything that I was not the right person to do or that didn't make sense. That was one of the best conversations, one of the best things I did when I was working for an employer and with a manager, because not only I went back to balancing my work, but also it helped having that conversation at the team level. What are our priorities? What do we actually want to work on and what makes sense? So if you're struggling with this and you're working as part of a team or you have a manager, really do try to have that conversation with them.
Love that. That's been a really, really good whirlwind of questions we've answered there. Was there any leaving comments or remarks you both want to make before I wrap up the show?
I thoroughly enjoyed this, really. Just, you know where to find Anne-Laure and I online. Andy's HVC on Twitter and Instagram. I've got a newsletter that I think has been shared already. And this is a really quality conversation that I don't typically have. So thank you for having me on here. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks so much for the great questions as well. It was really interesting. And yeah, I think the best ways to learn is to ask ourselves challenging questions. And yours certainly were interesting and challenging at times. So thank you so much for that. Very grateful.
Love that. Well, thanks guys. That was episode 2. We've got 2 more in May. We're going to be announcing 3 more events in a newsletter tomorrow morning. This recording of this session is going to be available tomorrow, along with the details that Dami's been sharing in the comments. If you want to tag me in any of your socials, it's at Bejay Mulenga. I wanted to just reiterate something that we've opened up. So we're now opening up a bit more of a peer-to-peer coaching, myself and my network around me. So if anyone is looking to transition or change their business at the moment, we've got an afternoon slot or half an hour each. There's 4 slots. 5 people already booked this week. But from next week, we're taking bookings on. Just call up. I think right now it's about having unity in the community. And that's why we're doing this series. Thank you both for attending. See everyone later.